Air traffic control versus pilots.
Stop. 28, reporting.
Coming up. Hey 7-4 crew, welcome back. If you don't know me, my name's Kelsey. I'm a 747 pilot. My channel, 7-4 Gear, is all about aviation. In this episode of Air Traffic Control versus Pilots, we have a small aircraft that's taxiing around a larger aircraft as it gets ready to start its engines. And then we have two aircraft on crossing runways that one confused their call signs, so they take off at the same time. If you have a video that you think would be great in this series, please just send it to my Instagram, 74gear.com, or the free forum. I want to thank all of you for sending these in. Honestly, without your help, we couldn't keep this going. All right, let's get into it.
Hey, Sam from Grand Allegiant 269.
269 ground.
I don't know if you're aware, we had a serious taxi bias on the right-hand side of the taxiway where we're sitting here now while our ground crew was disconnected.
Allegiant 269, Roger. I was just observing that a while ago. I wasn't sure. There shouldn't have been anybody on the taxiway there.
Yeah, we were kind of surprised because as we set the parking brake here and the ground crew was getting ready to disconnect, we're going to start number 2 up there. Like, hey, we got some guy trying to taxi around behind us underneath our right wing. So,
Roger.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something about it. I don't know if he was clear to where he was supposed to be going or what, but nonetheless, I think we're going to probably file a safety event report or something about that.
Allegiant 269, Roger.
One of the best parts about flying a small aircraft is you don't have all the rules that you have when you're flying a commercial aircraft. When you're flying a commercial aircraft, your airline gives you a manual of all the ways and the procedures that they want you to do for every single step. When you're flying a small aircraft, there are certain rules you have to follow, but they're not nearly as rigid as when you're flying a commercial aircraft, because a commercial aircraft is owned by your airline, so they say, this is exactly how we want you to do everything. However, this isn't the Wild West. This isn't the 1930s where you can just basically do whatever you want, because at that time there were no rules. So taxiing around another plane when they're getting ready to start their engines, that's never going to be acceptable. This is the video that got sent in with part of the audio, where the ground crew actually recorded the plane going underneath the wing while they were getting ready to start their engine. Air traffic control usually gives you very rigid and strict and clear instructions of how they want you to get to your destination or where they want you to move on the airport and then hold short of a specific spot. However, during the peak of the COVID pandemic, when I was flying around a lot of cargo, there were times where I'd land at an airport and they would say, oh, you can taxi to park however you want. You're clear to cross all runways. There's no other plane scheduled to land or take off here for the next couple of hours, which was just crazy because some of the airports were really massive. So in this scenario here where you have this person that's taxiing around a plane, even though they might have been given some instructions to head that direction, it doesn't mean that you can just bypass all rules to go wherever you want to go. So this is a chart of the airport where this is all taking place. And I'm going to make some assumptions of what is happening here. The Allegiant plane has gotten pushed back from one of these gates here, and I'm assuming they're facing west, so they're probably going to be planning to depart runway 9 left over here. What this means is that any landing planes would have landed and been taxiing back to park here on Charlie, which is where they're at. And a small plane would be heading over to this section right here of the airport to park. Now, I couldn't find the audio of actually what this Cirrus got told as far as what their instructions were to go park, but I'm sure it was something like taxi via Charlie to parking, something like that. The thing is that the plane is sitting right here on Charlie. The controllers probably weren't expecting a pilot to taxi around another plane that's on that taxiway that's getting ready to start their engines, like you see him doing right here. There are some serious risks on both sides for both the Allegiant aircraft and the Cirrus aircraft in this situation. If the Allegiant aircraft were to start their engine and they were to have some type of a malfunction or something like that, the Cirrus plane that's behind it could be affected and possibly hurt from that. Or if they were to start their engines and add a bunch of thrust for whatever reason, it could flip the Cirrus over or really damage that aircraft. So there's some serious risk there. As well, if that plane that was taxiing around the outside of them were to have some type of a malfunction or problem, or the Allegiant aircraft were to evacuate out that side of the aircraft for whatever reason, now these slides come out and then the Cirrus is now chewing up into that slide. There's all kinds of crazy possible scenarios of things that could go on in this particular instance. I'm not familiar with Sanford as I've never flown in there. At some airports you have a ramp area which is uncontrolled, meaning the air traffic control isn't directing you of exactly how to get out or move around in that area. However, that doesn't give you authorization to do stupid or silly things. I'm assuming that the pilot had to speak to someone in the FAA regarding this situation, and I'm hoping that it wasn't a scenario of someone feeling entitled. Maybe you remember that video I did a while back about the guy flying into Bravo airspace and then arguing with the controller about it. I'm hoping it wasn't one of those situations. I'm also hoping it wasn't one of these situations. This is an unrelated video of a pilot with a code brown situation. If you aren't familiar with the code brown situation, I will put a link to that video that I did explaining that and all the possible implications of what happens if you're flying with a code brown situation. And while it is pretty funny to watch something like that happen, it is not funny to have it happen to you in real life. Ask me how I know.
Delta 1328, be advised similar call sign on frequency of Southwest 3828, cross runway 31 center and runway 31 left, taxi to Yankee to 4 right.
Pacific 31 center and 31 left, Yankee to 4 right, Delta 1328 will be aware.
Southwest 3828, be advised similar call sign on frequency of Delta 1328. And once you approach 31 right, as you're crossing it, you can switch over to power. Have a good day.
All right, we'll be listening up for that, and we'll switch over to towers to report 319 Southwest 320.
Midway is Chicago's other airport. It's a really small airport. They have a lot of runways in a very small area. I used to fly in there all the time when I was at the regionals, and the controllers there and at O'Hare, they both do an amazing job with the volume of traffic that comes in there and keeping things moving very quickly. What's happening in this situation is you have two planes with similar call signs. And what the controllers do, which I think is a great idea, I don't know who came up with it, but I think it's an amazing idea, is they will call you and tell you, hey, there's a plane with a similar call sign to you. So that really helps you differentiate and focus more as far as when they're saying your specific call sign. The thing is when you're talking with another person up there, sometimes you only catch the tail end of what you're saying. So your call sign might be Boeing 123, but if you're talking with the other person doing checklists or talking about the taxi instructions as far as where you're going to go, and you hear Boeing, but you may not hear all of it because you're talking, then you hear 123, but there's another Airbus 123, for example, then you're going to be confusing and maybe thinking they said Boeing 123 because you heard the call sign blah 123. So what they'll say is advise similar call sign on frequency. So that way if you hear just 123 and you weren't sure if you heard Boeing 123, you'll call and verify that you got the actual right instructions because there was another similar plane with your call sign on it. So air traffic control is advising these two aircraft, hey, there's another plane that's on this runway that is going, or on this airport that has a similar call sign to you, so be advised and pay extra close attention. That's what's happening so far. This is a chart of Midway where all this is happening. You have Delta 1328 is going to be told to line up on this runway right here, which is 4 right, and Southwest 3828 is going to be taking off from this runway right here, which is 31 center. Something you should also be aware of is this is a hub for Southwest. Southwest is one of their main bases is Midway. So they typically have the home field advantage, if you want to say that, because they're going to be familiar with that airport, all the different procedures going in and out of there. So they're going to be more familiar, typically speaking, because that being their home base, it's where they go in and out of all the time. The risk is that when you're at your home base, is that sometimes you can get complacent. Sometimes you're better at following and picking up everything, but you can also be complacent and get used to hearing certain instructions and not necessarily listening. On the other side of that, you have Delta, which is, it's not their home base. You know, you have Atlanta and a few other bases, but it's not Midway. So when I'm flying into an airport that I'm not very familiar with or that I don't go there very often, I try to listen more closely or pay more attention and focus more because now I need to think more about what's going on. However, because that's going on, you're not necessarily familiar with all the taxiways. You can also make mistakes. So both have their advantages and disadvantages of flying into airports you are very familiar with and totally unfamiliar with. There's an advantage and a disadvantage to both. So here is the setup. Southwest will be taking off here and Delta will be taking off from here. And obviously, these are crossing runways. I think you know what's going to happen next. Listen up.
1828 Midway Tower, traffic hold position on a cross runway, traffic on a 4 mile funnel, lands at parallel, and traffic here runway 10 mile funnel, 4 right, line of point.
4 right, on 1328.
28 Midway Tower, runway 31 center, line up and wait, don't plan on stopping.
31 center, line of point, Southwest 3828.
Right, traffic hold position on the cross runway, traffic on a 3 mile funnel for the cross runway, no delay please, turn left heading 250, runway 31 center, clear for takeoff, the wind 060 at 9er.
takeoff.
2 call 1 South 3828, verify no delay, left to 250 through and center clear for takeoff.
Takeoff 317, no delay, heading 250, southwest 3820.
28, stop.
28, reporting.
I've talked about this in past videos, but when two pilots or two people are speaking at the same time, we call it being stepped on, and this is what it sounds like right here.
Takeoff 317, no delay, heading 250, southwest 3820.
But in that scenario, the pilots that are both stepping on each other, both is taking the call back, and both of them are stepping on each other. Southwest, who was the last one to finish talking, would have known that Delta had taken that call because they both started transmitting at the same time. When you're transmitting, you can't hear anybody else transmitting. You're the only one that's transmitting. The only person that would be able to hear what was going on was the air traffic controller. So in this scenario, you would be the air traffic controller hearing that two people are talking at the same time. But you notice that Southwest finished talking last, which lets the controller know that Southwest was the last one to finish reading their clearance for takeoff. Listen to this.
Takeoff 317, no delay, heading 250, southwest 3820.
There was a clue for both crews of who was going to go first. If you listen at the beginning, when he first tells Delta to line up and wait, then he calls Southwest and tells them don't plan on stopping. Listen to this again.
3820 Midway Tower, runway 31 center, line up and wait, don't plan on stopping.
Now maybe that's not something you heard when you first listened to this, but if you're sitting there and you have a similar call sign to another aircraft and you're at a place like Midway where there's a lot of traffic that's happening and you hear the other aircraft get told don't plan on stopping, that tells you they're going to be going before you are because you're on a crossing runway. So they're not going to let two of you take off at the exact same time. So he's getting told just plan on not stopping, and you're being told, in this case you're Delta, you're being told you're just going to be lining up and waiting. So that's the clue. Southwest is hearing that, expecting they're going to be going first. Delta should be listening to that, thinking they are going to be going first. So that's the first clue of what's going on. The second thing that, even with the similar call signs, the second thing that is important to hear is the actual runway. Usually when you get onto a runway, you say runway 31 center, 4 left, whatever the runway is, you'll get on and you'll verify that that is the runway that you're getting on, because there's been accidents where pilots line up on the wrong runway and then the runway is too short for their aircraft or whatever. It wasn't a completed runway and they confused the left side to the right side. There's been some instances like that. So in that reason, you have a lot of crew, when they line up onto a runway, the crews will say 4 left, inside and outside, or on the grass and on the glass, meaning they see it outside on the field, but they also matches up with all the computers inside. So they'll say things like that, right? So if they would have said that as they were getting onto the runway, let's say they're getting onto 4 right. So they're getting onto 4 right, but then the controller says runway 31 center, or whatever runway that's not your runway, then that should be your second indication, hey, that's not the runway that we're on. Listen.
2 call 1 South 3820, verify no delay, left to 250 through and center clear for takeoff.
A bell should have gone off for the Delta crew because they're on 4 right and 31 center is getting cleared for takeoff. So even though it's a similar call sign, it's not the same, even though it's a similar call sign, they're hearing a different runway from the runway that they're lined up on. So that should have been the second indication, hey, there's something not right. One of those two pilots should have heard that. Now, it's happened to me when I'm coming in to land. Let's say I'm the flying pilot, and let's use Miami, which has runway 9 and 27, which is typically the runway that we land on. When we're landing on runway 9, which is the primary runway all the time, one time, I don't know, 3-4 months ago, we were coming in and the winds were going the other direction. So we had lined up and planned to land on that runway. The controller said, Boeing 123, you're cleared to land runway 9. Now here's the thing, that's the same piece of pavement, right? Runway 9 and runway 27. But I said, hey, no, he said 9, we're on 27. Oh, he said, oh yeah, okay. So he called back and said, confirm land runway 27. And the controller said, yeah, affirmative, you're clear to land runway 27. So the reason that's important is because let's say something were to go wrong. We were to land on that same piece of pavement. There's nobody else out there, but we go and land on that same piece of pavement. If we go and land there and then something were to go wrong, another plane were to come out, or who knows what, if there was any type of accident at all whatsoever, the FAA, when they start looking at it, would look at something like that and say, hey, you got clear to land on runway 27, not runway 9, or runway 9, not runway 27. Or he said Boeing 123 was cleared to land, and you're Boeing 321. Even all those things, it doesn't matter. If it's not your call sign and that right runway, and you land on there and something goes wrong, you're going to be in trouble. So it's really important to listen to those specific terms. When you get cleared for takeoff or cleared to land, that you're using the exact same tail number, that's your tail number, or the exact same call sign, because if it goes wrong, that's going to be part of the investigation. Does that have anything to do with it? No, you were the only person that was supposed to land on that runway, but another plane moved down, and because they weren't paying attention, just taxied out in the middle, and there was an accident. Now, it's totally their fault, right? If you had said back, clear to land runway 27, you wouldn't be in trouble at all. But in this scenario, because you said clear to land runway 9 and you were landing on runway 27, now they start going, oh, well, looks like you weren't paying attention or whatever. Stupid, I know, but that's how it works. The controller had a clue that something had happened, that maybe there was a mix-up, because he read it back a second time of who was cleared for takeoff. And that was another reminder to the Delta crew that it wasn't them that was cleared for takeoff, right? So he heard that two people talking at the same time, stomping on each other. That said, normally if you're saying cleared for takeoff to a specific plane, there should only be one readback. And typically, somebody's not going to talk about, hey, I need a landing clearance or anything like that at the exact same time that you just cleared another plane to land. Most pilots know that. So when he hears them talking on each other, he goes, that's not right. He says it again, who is cleared for takeoff, and then it's stomped on again. So if you're the controller, which I think is exactly what happened here, he heard someone else take that call twice, and he probably got up on that window to look out to see exactly what was going on. Listen to this.
You call 1 South 3820, verify no delay, left to 250 through and center clear for takeoff.
Now here's the thing, both the Southwest and Delta pilots are professionals, right? All of those guys are professionals in what they do. So as they start their takeoff, they see that someone else is taking off as well. And that's typically what pilots are doing. They're paying attention to their surroundings, or they should be in most cases. And the pilots that are at this level have a lot of experience, so they're usually listening to what's going on and looking at what's going on, and they're paying attention to what's going on. So in this scenario, both the Delta crew and the Southwest crew, both of them saw, oh man, there's another person that's taking off at the same time, and they both aborted, and at the exact same time, air traffic control started screaming, stop, stop, stop. So there's 3 different people trying to avoid this, and these planes don't even get anywhere close to each other. Now, I'm sure you may be wondering, why have a plane line up and wait on a specific runway when they're not going to be cleared for takeoff, and they're going to clear another plane for takeoff at the exact same time? It's a fair question to ask. Look at this. There's a plane coming in to land on runway 4 left over here. His plan was to fire off southwest off of this runway, 31 center, and once they got out of the way, the plane here could land on 4 left, and then Delta could take off on this one 4 right at the exact same time. 99% of the time, pilots are going to get this one right. This is a very rare occurrence, and that's why it's on this series. A lot of the time that I put this stuff on here, people go, oh, how often does this happen? Well, it's very rare, and that's why it's on here. But this is a great learning experience for those of you that are planning to become pilots, or for those of you that like listening to air traffic control, to really start listening to the intricacies. When he says something like, don't plan on stopping, or something like that, that's a clue of what this controller is thinking. So you guys, as pilots and air traffic controllers, are working together as a team. So this controller is giving the pilot, all of them, both crews, a heads up on who's going first by saying that. Now, that is something that just takes experience to start listening to, because there's a lot of stuff happening at Midway. There's a lot of traffic. You can see you have a plane taking off, one landing, then another one taking off. There's a lot that's going on in a very small airspace there. The other thing to know is that Chicago obviously has bad weather sometimes, and I've been in airports with extremely bad weather. This type of thing that you're seeing here, where things are happening extremely fast, that is not the case when things are really low visibility or things like that. Because you have the tower is up in the sky, so they can't see anything. The pilots are moving slower because they can't necessarily see the markings on the runway. So we're moving a lot slower. It all goes super, super slow. So you would think, oh, that's a really high risk time. But the reality is that the planes get spaced out a lot more. Everything moves slower. So if you're experiencing delays during the winter time or things like that, part of the reason is that everybody's moving slower to be extra safe. When the visibility is perfect and blue skies like it is today right now in Dallas, if you have those blue skies all the time, you're moving quicker because they're able to fire things off quicker. And they're expecting that the professionalism from the pilots to catch up and pick up on all the things that are going on. And so in this scenario, you have 2 planes with similar call signs. One crew wasn't really paying attention to everything that was going on, and the other crew, Southwest, was doing exactly what they were told. All right, let's listen to the last part of this.
3828.
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, for Southwest on 31 Center, were we the ones cleared for takeoff?
Yes, sir, you were. You were the one, you were doing what you're supposed to be doing.
And Delta was rolling also?
Yep. He took your call sign. Somebody kept stepping on you, and I couldn't figure out who it was. And then that's why I reiterated that it was you that I was clearing for takeoff.
We just got to run some numbers and contact company.
Roger.
1528, same thing. Got a call company.
Roger.
So now both crews are going to have to fill out reports. Air traffic control is going to have to fill out a report, and the Delta crew is probably going to have to go do some extra training of some kind. Simulator training or something like that is probably what's going to happen. I'm just making a guess here. But here's the thing that's important to note. This was a very cheap lesson. And the reason I say it's a cheap lesson is because nobody was injured or hurt in this situation. You see, Delta learned something here, the crew here learned the importance of really listening up to the other people or similar call signs. And I'm guessing that they will probably never make this mistake again in their career. And so what I call a cheap lesson is something that you learn from, and it's going to cost you some simulator time and something like that, but it's going to be a lesson where nobody gets hurt, nobody gets killed, and a lot of people wouldn't even have really known that this had taken place if it didn't end up on a series like this. So it's important that as a pilot, you're always staying ahead of the game, and in something like this, when you make a mistake, in this scenario, when these Delta crew make a mistake, that's something that they're going to learn from. If you're learning from your mistakes and nobody's getting hurt, that's a cheap lesson in my book. All right, now it's time for the fun one.
Center Southwest 1253, starting to pick up some fairly continuous light chop. Any ride reports up ahead?
Stand by. Extension 670, how's your ride at 400?
670, it's smooth here, but I expect it's all pilot technique.
Southwest 1253 vacation ahead of you, 40 miles, you getting smooth.
Well, I'll have to work on my technique then. Thank you.
Very nicely said.
Now, obviously, this pilot is joking. Usually, there's two different types of pilots that I've seen. You have the self-deprecating pilots, which typically make the jokes about how bad they are, and then you have the other side where the pilots are joking about how good they are. Usually, it seems to be one of the other, in my experience, when you talk to pilots about their flying abilities. Earlier, I talked about a Code Brown situation. If you want to hear more about that story, it's in my Cockpit Confessional series. Check out this video. And if you want to see another air traffic control versus pilots, check this one out, up here. I look forward to hearing from you. Until then, keep the blue side up.